Welcome to Localite, everybody. Today we're discussing the history of railroads here in the Columbia Gorge, and with me is Jerry Tanquist, a local railroad historian, and he is going to inform me, as well as all of you, about some really interesting stuff regarding railroads. So Jerry, thanks for coming on.
Thank you.
So let's start off with the Great Southern Railroad. Tell me all about it.
All right, the Great Southern was a dream of a man named John Heinrich, and he was convinced by some of his friends that there ought to be a railroad from the Columbia River all the way through Central Oregon to San Francisco, California. And he came down and checked out the situation here in the Dalles and said, yeah, I think we could do that. And so in 1905 they started to build, and they got built from the Dalles to Dufur along 15 Mile Creek. And they passed through some neighborhoods, including Petersburg and Fairbanks and Rentham and Rice and Boyd, to get to Dufur.
Okay.
And the railroad was built to serve the farmers, to haul grain and produce and timber. And they had a mail contract, and they also had a passenger car, so it was like a bus. The train could be waved down, and people could get on and off wherever they needed to get on or off.
Oh, okay.
And in 1913, the railroad was extended on into Friend with the idea that, by that time, the dream to go into California was gone because James Hill, who we'll talk about a little later,
right,
had built a railroad up the Deschutes, and he got to Bend and was going on to California. So Heinrich's dream of going to California was over by 1909. But in 1913, they decided they'd build on to Friend, and they had a timber contract, and they're going to serve the farmers down in Smock Prairie and down towards Ty Valley. And so they got to Friend in 1913. That's as far as it ever got.
Oh, okay.
But when that happened, the last stagecoach line out of Dufur was closed because the railroad took over the mail contract and, of course, hauling passengers and freight. And Friend became quite a little community, a center of that whole neighborhood out there with stores and a church and a school and a post office, and it was a very lively place.
And all a result of the railroad?
All because the railroad came in there, right.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay.
And when the railroad left in 1936, when it closed down, Friend began to shrink as well, and there's the old abandoned store, which included the post office, is still there, and the school is still there. And there's lots of folks around in the neighborhood, in the countryside, but the town itself is basically disappeared.
Oh, okay. What about now? Because at one point, the father sort of gave the reins over to the son, so to speak, and the son ran the railroad, but
yes,
never really grasped the business side of it, I guess. So what can you tell us about that? Well,
the father tried real hard to get his son to be a businessman, to think economics and to think lines of credit and how to make it profitable and to serve the community and tie in with Union Pacific. And the son never quite got that. He would rather put on his coveralls and go down and work on the engine and get all greasy and fixing the engine, making it run.
Oh, okay.
And the father died a sad man in that sense because the son never did get it. And that's one of the reasons the railroad failed, because he didn't have the business savvy to find the ways to keep it working and keep it up and going.
Okay.
As well as, of course, the historic facts of the Depression and the banks closing and all that.
Sure, a lot of things outside of his control.
Yeah.
So it was the father's dream then basically to pass along this legacy to the son and have the son continue to operate it, but that just never happened. But he got as far as Friend.
Right.
Okay.
And the best years were up through until about 1927. The train would run every day, one trip all the way up the line and back, and carrying passengers and picking up milk cans along the way from the farmers and hauling grain. There are lots of warehouses along the way for bagged wheat.
Oh, okay.
And they'd pull into a siding there and load those up. And there are stories of them hauling other things, like in the place where we live, Otto Johnson, who was the farmer out there and one of my wife's ancestors, would order a carload of cut firewood, and the train would bring it at the end of the train, drop it off there, uncouple it. Train would head to town, and Otto would be out there all night unloading the firewood.
Oh, yeah?
Because the next day the train was going to come back, and there was no siding there, so that boxcar was going with the train.
Ah.
And that's an example of the way the train served the people up and down the line.
Sure. Well, now, I heard this story about something throwing coal at dogs.
That's a good story.
What do you know about that?
Well, that's my first railroad story.
Okay.
Jack Kaiser is our neighbor. And when I married Betsy Johnson 15 years ago, and I realized the train used to go through our place, so I said, go talk to Jack. He said, he knows about that train. I've heard him talk about it a lot. And I went over, and I already knew who he was, but we would never talk trains. He said, yeah. I said, I've got pictures of that train. He brought out his family album, and there was a picture in 1921 of the train running through his place, an engine and about 3 or 4 cars. And that was my first train picture, and he let me make a copy of it.
Oh, cool.
And then he said, when I was a kid, we had a dog that would chase the train. And the engineer would get mad at the dog and throw coal at the dog. And after the train went by, the Kaiser boys would go out and pick up the coal and carry it into the kitchen and use it in the kitchen stove. And that was my first train story. That's what got me started. So
okay.
I always can give Jack credit for getting me going on railroad history.
All right. So that kind of got your interest.
Yeah.
Huh? All right.
And he said another story he had was that they used to sometimes have a handcar that they would leave on the siding up at Fairbanks, which is a mile above our place. And said the boys would come out after school and get on the handcar and ride it home.
Really?
And of course, it was downhill all the way home. To get it back up to the school, it was a lot of work.
Yeah.
But that was another one of his stories.
Well, good stuff. We'll keep talking about this when we come back from the break. So we'll be right back with Jerry Tanquist, local railroad historian. So stay with us.